Alrighty, good afternoon. I'm going to get us started as people trickle in as usual. Welcome to our Wildfire seminar series for spring quarter. We're about a halfway point. I'd like to acknowledge the Climate and Energy Policy Program, the Woods Institute, as well as Stanford Sustainability Data Science, which is making this series possible. I hope you've enjoyed the talks thus far, and if you're just joining us for the first time, I hope you'll continue to join us for the remaining 4 weeks of great talks on diverse topics related to wildfire. We are recording all, if not all, of the seminar series. So if you have any questions about watching any of the previous ones, drop me an email and I'm happy to give you access to those recorded sessions. So for this week, we are pleased to have Kevin Johnson from PG&E with us. Kevin leads the Wildfire Resilience Partnerships Group and is part of the Wildfire Preparedness and Operations Department at PG&E. His team focuses on public-private partnerships for enabling cost-effective community wildfire resilience, forest health restoration, and advanced wildfire response solutions. Kevin holds a Bachelor of Arts from UCLA and an MBA from Dartmouth. Today, he will speak to us about some of the cross-sectoral partnerships that PG&E has joined or co-developed in the wildfire space. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn over controls to our guest speaker, Kevin. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you, Derek. Yeah, appreciate you having me. I've been watching several of these sessions over the years, and I've always found them the ones I've seen really well curated, very insightful. So yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity. So I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, great. Can you confirm you can see it?
There you go. You're good to go.
All right, we're in business. Okay, great. So diving right in. So thank you for the intro as well. So I'm going to skip kind of introducing myself and we'll dive right into the material. So first, this is an audience that probably knows PG&E, but worth highlighting kind of the nature of the risk that we face. About 50% of our service area is high fire threat. About a quarter of our assets are in those high threat areas. And so really it's just a very dangerous operating environment for utility to be operating within. I want to start out setting some of the policy context, and that'll kind of drive towards, I think, some of the opportunities later. First up, want to highlight that on the policy side, and there's certainly a recognition of the catastrophic fire problem we face. We've had the wildfire crisis strategy that said they wanted to basically treat 50 million acres over 10 years. And if you assume about $2,000 an acre, that would come to a cost of about $100 billion. The IIJA and IRA bills funded, historic funding opportunities, funded $5 billion, which is effectively, barely a down payment on the total need. So, have the right objectives, but have some shortcomings to get there. The new administration is keen on expanding timber, which could help as a big part of the problem. NEPA is getting reformed. That may streamline things. Staffing cuts at agencies at the same time, and also potential for more cross-agency confusion in different NEPA interpretations. And then last, the Fix Our Forests Act, could help clean up some of the challenges with doing some of this work. It only very indirectly addresses that enormous funding gap, and I guess that has gone through the Senate at this point. This slide a little out of date, but it still needs to get reconciled and passed. So I think recognition, but we have a long way to go before we feel like we're doing well here. Similar story on the state side. Historically, California about 4 to 13 million acres burned per year, and that's a lot of that with indigenous stewardship in addition to natural fires. Depending on who you ask, we've achieved 700 to a little bit over 1 million acres recently treated per year, and the state has also set kind of ambitious goals from 1.5 million acres in 2030 to 2.5 in 2045. CARB says for our climate goals we need to hit 2.3 million acres, but really there's an analysis also that showed that probably the highest societal return on investment actually would be optimized at around 4 million targeted acres per year. So we have ambitions at the state as well, but they are frankly, unfunded to the degree needed, and are still, there are insurance reforms underway, which should help. But I think it may convert what is currently an availability crisis into an affordability crisis once the prices can closer reflect risk. And there's still the question of how mitigations might be rewarded in those models. Zone 0, the state could pass that soon. We'll see how much how strict that is and how well it's enforced. And then last, building codes. Since 2008, the building codes appear to reduce a lot of risk, but the majority of the state's building code is not to code. Building stock is not to code, and there's still local interpretations of code. So just as a preview, I'm going to share a bunch of bad news slides, and they'll get better later. So the LA fires also kind of highlight the distinct challenge and really integrating my industry with the utilities with private insurance. And we're really in a tough place. Worth highlighting upfront that utilities, in a somewhat non-intuitive way, kind of are like another insurer. When there is a large fire, and if utility equipment started the fire, insurers turn right around to utilities to try and get compensated for the damages. And especially in a state with strict liability, inverse condemnation, we are a weird form of insurance. And so it's worth looking at both together. On the utility side, there's potential near-term depletion of the California Wildfire Fund that was set up to backstop the utilities, kind of a statewide self-insurance pool for the utilities. And so we'll find out, first of all, if Southern California Edison is found liable for that fire, and then we'll see what the damages are next. Successive backstop funding source would not be clear. If we need to get more injection into that fund, would that come from rates, which are quite high right now, or taxes, which are also hard to come by, or potentially a federal option, but that takes a lot of coordination too. So it's hard to see kind of how that would get squared. And so, this brought us to the obvious fire risk, and the precarity of that fund, raises bankruptcy risk and degrades ongoing affordability and stock performance. And this is, it was very clear when these fires broke out. There's a 19% share price drop for PG&E, even though there is no conception that PG&E started the fire, because that interdependency, where if one of these funds gets depleted, then PG&E is going to be in a tough spot anyways. On the private insurance side, the Fair Plan Last Resort option may now have third largest market share in the state, which is not what you want for a backup option. And they posted a $1 billion assessment after the LA fires. Insurers were already pulling back, and as discussed, there may be a shift from attainability to affordability challenge soon. So really, I would characterize this as both industries are in a bit of a downward spiral. Every big fire is simply a question of who happens to have started that fire. And in that case, there are repercussions for that industry, but we're both dealing with the same fundamental underlying risk, and we're in an unsustainable context right now. And basically, we can't keep doing the same thing, or we're going to continue down that downward path. So we can't do risk transfer or insure our way out of the risk. We also can't suppress our way out. So I wanted to dispel that as well. Generally, if fires are too fast, intense, or if there are too many at the same time, it almost doesn't matter how much suppression. And so on the left, you can see as a proxy for firefighting investment, CAL FIRE funding. You see it's really dramatically increased in the last few years, but we all know of catastrophic fires that have happened in the last several years. And so it's clear that, it's not preventing those from happening. And on the right, I know Michael Wara showed a similar graph a few weeks ago, but I want to hammer that home. The impact of climate change on wildfire in some respects uncertain. I don't know that we have a clear line of sight to how it will impact winds, for example. But what we do know is that there is going to be a net overall drying effect over time that will stress vegetation and structures, for that matter, from the perspective of drying them out and making them more ready to burn. That is expected to increase in all the models though potentially with injection of large rainstorms at times too, which could cause vegetation to grow out and then dry. And so, the last 10 years of fire weather may be the best that we're going to see moving forward. And so, in that sense, we're on an accelerating treadmill, and we actually need to do more just to stay in the same place from a fire risk standpoint, which again will challenge suppression as a. So I want to characterize the wildfire problem. I actually think this is an achievable problem to solve, but it depends on how we define it and how we go after solving it. And so, whose job is it to create large scale, landscape scale wildfire resilience, which estimated could be about $3 billion a year. It's nobody's job, and that's kind of part of the problem. A lot of people think, well, the state should pay for it. The state is in a tough from a budget and tax perspective, and also being able to forecast year to year. And so, they can chip in some, but it's not clear that it is fundamentally something that the state could take entirely on its back. Same with the federal government. It's not entirely clear that it's totally their job. Also, huge debt burden, high interest rates. And so I can't look at that as a bottomless pool of funding either. I think they can chip in some. Private landowners, generally don't see this as being their job. Even often Zone 0 gets a lot of pushback as but one example. The insurance industry has not seen this as their job. They've lost $30 billion in net losses over the last 30 years in California, which is hard to fathom. But it's generally, seen as they try and price risk and transfer risk as opposed to reducing it. That's typically been kind of the perspective to date. Utility industry also, very, very focused on utility ignition, but hasn't necessarily seen resilience as their job either, because we have to do right by our customers and the bills that they pay for energy. And then there are a host of other beneficiaries who also don't see it as their job. And so from my perspective, if a lot of these groups chipped in a bit and we did so in a coordinated way, we'd actually probably be in a pretty good spot, and we could get ahead of the climate treadmill and probably de-risk to a significant degree the state. But we need to do things differently than now. So, what would be needed, and there's a quote, is around that 4 million acres of targeted treatment per year for the highest societal return on investment. Also targeted defensible space and structural hardening, which might be able to reduce losses by about 50% in big fires. And I have the theory that utilities could be a catalytic agent to kind of help break through this collective action challenge. And there are several reasons. One is that utilities are part of every community. We have a stake and a role in every single community that we serve, in addition to the big balance sheet that the company brings to the table. The investor-owned utilities in California spend about $8 to $9 billion trying to prevent utility asset fires per year, and that's just it's a very big number. And I think there could be opportunity to kind of rebalance that a bit to also look at resilience. Utilities have also shown the ability to catalyze and crowd in funds. Salt River Project is a publicly owned water and energy utility in Arizona. They realized that their watersheds were at risk from fire, and basically set up a Northern Arizona Forest Fund, and kind of invited others to join in and to take on meaningful projects to reduce the risk of fire to that landscape. They've been quite successful at that. They've gotten a lot more work done than would have happened had they not set that fund up. And for every dollar that they've put in, they've been able to raise effectively $3 through grants, private companies, governments, and other stakeholders. I see no reason to think that wouldn't also work in California on the landscape level, also potentially at the community level. Resilience, previewing a little bit what's to come, appears to be really cost effective. If PG&E and other utilities were to lean into resilience, it's actually, compared to our traditional off-the-shelf solutions, it actually is quite cost effective from an investment perspective. And then last, the state seems to be realizing that utilities could bring something to the table for resilience, and they've the Wildfire Task Force for the state created a deliverable for 2025 to create a utility wildfire resilience partnership program opportunity to kind of figure out how to work together kind of on this bigger challenge. So, why would utilities be doing resilience? How does that fit into the bigger picture? I think this is a really helpful graphic to kind of understand the many different pathways that PG&E is taking to address this challenge. And I know Andy Abranches, my senior director from Wildfire, has come on and talked about a lot of these solutions in a past presentation. But there's kind of a flow of a fire. It could start with an asset failure, which could create a spark, create ignition, create fire spreads, and create catastrophic fire. A lot of our solutions to date have, especially after 2017, 2018 fires, they often kind of shifted more to the left, trying to figure out how can we stop our assets from failing and preventing that spark from occurring. But as we've, I think, become more sophisticated and been able to take a longer view, our solution set has progressively shifted to balance also towards the right. And these public-private partnerships and resilience kind of fits into those categories of being able to reduce fire spread and prevent fires from becoming catastrophic. So it can create a lot of benefits, only but one of which being the reduction of damages from any fire that a utility equipment might spark. So what are the goals for PG&E setting up wildfires? But the three, to not get distracted by chasing too many things at one time. Obviously the first and biggest one is reducing wildfire risk. The second one is actually to bolster affordability. I think this is a way that we can get at a lot of risk and more quickly and more cost effectively than just using the portfolio that we have today. I think this is another tool in the toolbox we can use to kind of optimize how we reduce risk from our equipment and across the state. And then last, if we do, for example, forest resilience projects to reduce outages from our own equipment or from birds or other wildlife that may contact our wires. So I'm hoping this is a byproduct that we can also build into this at the same time too. I want to recognize there are a whole long list of co-benefits if we kind of are able to start achieving more resilience at scale. Some of these relate to ecosystem health, but also obviously human health, reduced smoke, affordability. There's water, carbon, recreation, local economies, insurance. It's kind of a long list that we can try and capture too. So how we've been kind of breaking down the opportunity, I think there are three main categories that we could look at and that we've been pursuing. One is to build community wildfire resilience. And so that's in some respects actually building capacity in communities and/or targeted solutions to help communities just be in a stronger position relative to their risk than they are today. And again, with the spirit of co-investing on that rather than necessarily the utility also doing it by itself. The second one is to restore forest and ecosystem health. Unhealthy ecosystems can create a lot higher wildfire risk, particularly in our kind of wooded. And so if we can restore forest health, that's a virtue in its own right, but also we can reduce wildfire risk and the intensity and spread of fire at the same time. And then last, we also innovate on wood management. Both of the activities to the left can create waste biomass, which itself obviously is capable of burning. A lot of people don't want to just leave it around. And so if we can find productive uses for that wood and/or reduce the cost and environmental performance of working with that wood, I think that can help then, it's a virtue in its own right, but can also then accelerate the two activities to the left. So looking at this kind of from a systems perspective and how can we kind of reduce the barriers and apply what's needed and find that complementarity in a given place. So we've really started doing some public-private partnerships on resilience in 2023. And the good news is they've generally been working. A key to this kind of new approach, utilities traditionally look at doing work where we do the work or we do it through contractors to our equipment and we own and fully fund that work. This resilience partnerships kind of opportunity is a different way of going about work and kind of leverages different instincts than we might have in this industry. The idea that basically we're not doing the work, we are going to work with communities or nonprofits or fire districts who are doing work where there's broader benefit and also benefit to our ratepayers and our customers. And so these are, and often we also fund this through grants to those organizations, typically nonprofits. versus actually doing contracted work directly. And so it's just a different kind of operational muscle than we've ever had before, operational in the sense of creating operational value. And so here are 5 example projects that are either underway or completed, and we have a long list. We invested in our first few products in 2023, stepped up with more in 2024, and hopefully you're going to be able to continue growing. But the key part early was to show that this actually works and is a dependable tool if we do it right. So some of the different examples or different flavors of resilience partnerships shown here. So on the left in Sonoma, basically funded, in a key road for getting people out during an event and getting fire trucks, say, in. We funded the clearance, roadside brushing and clearance along that route, which also has distribution lines above it. So we're helping both ingress and egress. We're also reducing the likelihood that a spark from vehicles might cause a roadside ignition, which is a common source of ignition, while also reducing the likelihood that if one of our pieces of equipment could somehow spark for some reason, there's less fuel for that spark to actually fall on. It also helps defend our assets if a fire were to come through the area, and also provides a better line of defense for firefighters to defend that, to make that a kind of defense corridor stacked in just that kind of one use case. In that case, we funded a fire foundation to do the work through the fire district. Up top, we have another model in Lake County where we funded fire and fuel crew, and with the idea of getting them seed funding so that if they get to a big enough size and they're able to retain enough of their crew, that they then be in a position to be able to go out and fight fires in other jurisdictions and get reimbursed for that, to be able to apply for grants and be more likely to be able to win them, and or to be able to do other contract fuels work to become a viable, sustainable entity in a county that doesn't otherwise have that many resources. And so that crew is now out there doing a lot of work, and I'm hopeful we're going to be able to see them become a self-sustaining entity as we move forward. They've so far done 4 really great quality fuels treatment projects in the area where we have co-benefit for the community and for PG&E risk. And then last, we also, on the wood management side, used a relatively new technology called a carbonizer, which is kind of like an air curtain burner for those familiar with that technology. Basically, where it's kind of a container-sized unit with no top, and it cycles air and basically burning through wood, but with much less emissions from a particulate standpoint and criteria pollutants. And in this case, the carbonizer also never has to be refilled as those technologies do. High throughput. They're also mobile, so we can take the machine. And the other great thing is, rather than creating ash, which doesn't have much value, we're creating biochar, which actually sequesters carbon for hundreds of thousands of years and is useful for soils reclamation, for stormwater remediation, composting, a whole lot of different uses. So theoretically, we're actually, slowing climate change while reducing our costs for wood, where we'd otherwise have to truck it an hour plus away to dispose of the wood. Getting trucks off the road, reducing motor vehicle risk, while reducing fuels burnt and those pollutants associated with the trucking, while sequestering carbon and creating our nonprofit partners there, Clear Lake Environmental Research Center, to effectively pick up wood. And we did another version of this in Nevada County as well, basically to pick up community wood and pool that with our wood such that we have enough wood to comfortably build before bringing this machine out, and then we all share in the reduced wood disposal costs. Another option is basically to work together on grant applications, and so we worked with the Butte County Fire Safe Council and co-funded a grant application from them, where the grant will actually treat some PG&E land that is adjacent to communities where there's fire risk. And so, we're helping this bigger community project to happen while there's a clear benefit for PG&E customers as well. Unfortunately, in this case, we picked a really good site, but actually a wildfire got to it before we were able to get through CEQA and start work. So it's now a combination of fuels treatment and post-fire restoration project. We also, for those familiar with Blue Forest Conservation, or Blue Forest as they're called now, did creative financing to basically accelerate the use of grant funding. And so in this case, the Upper Mokelumne watershed, we put in some flexible financing dollars. PepsiCo actually chipped in as well for their net water goals. And basically, what it enabled the project leads to do is that rather than having to do work and then wait for reimbursement, they're able to finance a lot of this work in a way they wouldn't be able to otherwise. And so the idea is to kind of move the risk reduction, forward by a matter of years, in a scalable way. And in this case, we're protecting PG&E hydro assets and water, reducing the consequences as well as the communities a bit farther afield. And then last on this slide, forest health restoration on private lands. One key interesting development so far is that we've had a hard time kind of getting our first really meaningful U.S. Forest Service project if it's not through an intermediary like Blue Forest. But private lands, even though there are a lot of small private landowners, American Forest Foundation seems to have developed a good tack through their My Sierra Woods program, being able to reach out to clusters who are interested, if approached the right way and with the right proposition, in getting their landscapes treated. And a lot of those private landowners constitute the wildland urban interface where a lot of the structure risk occurs and exists. So we funded them to kind of accelerate on top of a CAL FIRE grant, treating 20 acres to protect, in this case, a at-risk school is one of our first projects. We also funded some R&D around biomass disposal. And now we're actually using some of that funding to try and get much bigger CAL FIRE and/or federal grant dollars, again, which could represent a 1-to-4 or 1-to-8 match for PG&E dollars for broader resilience benefit, in this case, in Tuolumne County, and try and double down and really start to de-risk that landscape. So, some of the key learnings, what we've been trying to do is pick no regrets projects where we have a lot to learn, generally succeeded. And I think we've demonstrated that we can crowd in and catalyze third-party funding. And the model does appear to be scalable and replicable. So a key, aspect of doing new things at a regulated utility like PG&E is that we need our regulators to also embrace what we're doing to make sure that we're able to spend these funds and make sure that it's not going to come back to bite us later, frankly. And so we've been diligently submitting this new activity into our filings to our respective regulators. And a key part of that, though, is that we've also developed our first kind of consequence reduction valuation methodology. So how cost effective is it, for example, to fund a resilience project versus doing some of our more asset focused, solutions to date, or other parts of our wildfire portfolio. And so if we input the kind of fire behavior modeling and the reduced risk from that landscape, the cost of doing the work, the PG&E's cost share, because if we're not funding the whole work, then it gets even higher leverage for PG&E dollars. The ongoing maintenance costs, we want to assume that this work will be treated over time, that we might want to or need to co-fund that, and how frequently it needs to be maintained. We can then create a net risk reduction benefit and a benefit cost ratio that we can compare on an apples to apples basis with other mitigations that are typically more focused on trying to prevent on consequence reduction. And in this case, basically, we did preliminary analysis, and this technique penciled very well we have a circuit segment unit of analysis, and it scored very well on those. And potentially a 4 times benefit is kind of what we initially saw. And then, take a step, I think all this is scalable, and again, is something that I think PG&E can and should lean into. There are other kind of next frontier opportunity areas. And so I think because this is such a new approach, I think there's a lot more we can do. And part of the goal is to figure out how can we do even more faster, and more cost effectively. And so I would offer up, these are all kind of next gen, next step kind of pilots to try and build out more models that could do this work even better. So one is where there's opportunity to build biomass kind of bioeconomy infrastructure, which could be clean fuels, it could be mass timber for construction. That the waste wood actually has economic value at that point. Whereas with the carbonizer, we're trying to more cost effectively reduce uh, the cost of disposing of wood. In this case, the developers of these facilities would also be paying for the waste wood, and so there'd be a value there. And so it's actually a way for the waste wood to pay its way out of the forest and make this more self-sustaining type of approach to resilience. And so basically, want to figure out how to. We have some theories as to how you could stand up 10 or 15 year basically stable feedstock supply that to help finance those types of facilities, and then kind of create that virtuous flywheel. Second, we have these utility resilience corridors. Kind of a concept at this point that we're trying as quickly as we can, but the idea of if private landowners have power lines going through their property, basically they could we could work with them to create kind of resilience corridors where we'd be able to restore the health of that area and hopefully again reduce the amount of trees that might ever contact wires while creating kind of resilience corridors whereby there's less fuel for sparks to potentially fall on, and kind of create a lot of those kind of benefits from reliability as well as the fire consequence and ignition perspective at once. And so if we can repurpose some of our vegetation management dollars in that kind of way, I have a theory this is going to pencil out well, but we need to see if it works in practice, how private landowners respond, and to see if this is another tool to add to the toolbox. And then last, I do think there's an opportunity to kind of profile specific locations for resilience, kind of optimized resilience, where communities, are aligned with the need and the opportunity to reduce risk. So leveraging that Salt River Project model, for example, to crowd in geo-targeted funds and then to profile, what is the risk today? What could it be with a basket of mitigations? And then basically figure out, could PG could chip in a bit and probably make that a great deal for our customers if we can crowd in other funds to do that too. I have the theory that the insurance industry at some point could also start to recognize if the risk reduction is big enough, then it might be able to start reflecting availability or affordability of insurance as well. But kind of crowd in a lot of collaborators. And the theory is just let's pick a community, or two and try something new and see if we can make a model that might be able to replicate elsewhere. And so I want to kind of soft circle on some communities and see if we can develop that kind of product too. Last, a lot of other kind of R&D and pilots as well, focused on new technologies for biomass management. And so we're also theoretically could build chain of custody tracking and kind of optimization for if you have wood over here, what's the best use for it? You want to bring in a mobile solution versus take a car away, or do a conservation burn on site, for example. So try and also allow others to contribute their wood to projects and or have joint wood pickup. But I have the theory that we basically create a lot of efficiencies with that kind of common platform that would benefit both our wood management operations and others trying to do this good work too. Autonomous wildfire response. There was a demonstration last week by a company named Rain that we co-funded. Basically, is you could pre-position, say, Black Hawk helicopters that could quickly respond to fire. Want to kind of see, and PG is also a sponsor of the X Prize wildfire, looking kind of investing in getting these types of solutions to be able to come out to hopefully be able to more rapidly respond to and suppress nascent fires. We also have biomass partnerships, as we did in Lake and Nevada County. I want to do more of co-funded dip tanks to make water more available where it may not be available for rapid suppression. U.S. Forest Service partnerships. I think opportunity. There are different types of co-funding. I think that we could crowd in developing those first pilots to kind of create that those mechanisms to kind of make this attractive to different industries. Potential to bring on local fuel crews as contractors we're exploring, and also additional valuation methodologies. The valuation methodology I described before is just distribution, risk reduction, benefit, but there are a lot of other benefits created too, such as improved reliability, reducing risk from transmission infrastructure and reliability there, and also just the benefits of creating these defenses from any fire, even just the non-power line ones, which we stand to benefit from too, because it's disruptive to us as well. Obviously, when communities face fire, even if it's not from a utility power source. So if we can start to quantify these, then I think the value proposition for this new tool in the toolbox just gets higher. So we can build those out over time. So that's what I was prepared to talk about today. Welcome any questions or comments.
Well, Kevin, thank you very much for sharing. I think a refreshing and a different face of PG&E and what's going on. And I have a bunch of questions, but I'm going to turn it over to the audience because I can talk to you anytime. So please raise your hand, turn your camera on, or unmute yourself. Glad to have your questions for Kevin here. I think Lincoln's coming up.
There we go. Couldn't find the hand raising button. I'm curious, you mentioned obviously PG&E, Salt River Project. Are there others out there who are really best in class in it? And best in class is kind of a funny concept when when the field is evolving so rapidly. But is there anybody else out there on the cutting edge that you can point to?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would actually say I think the water utility industry is a little electric utility industry. So Yuba Water isn't a their financing model. On the electric side, yeah, we have a small cohort playbook and a business case that apply across utilities. The other one call out are Idaho Power. There's a regional planning group around Boise that is really cross-sectoral. So the utility is playing a role and they're chipping in, but they have kind of a collective type of risk reduction coalition that I haven't really seen adapted model to replicate. And they've been great about getting federal grants to kind of fund that work. So I think that's a model that's quite interesting. And then the Liberty Utilities, they created basically with National Forest Foundation enabler for actually a lot of these utilities. They created expanded fuel breaks around utility assets that go through forests. And so it was basically a cost share with the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit, the work beyond the rights of way, with Liberty kind of doing extra work and TLC within the rights of way in those areas. And they basically kind of coordinated their work and what could be a risk, which is these power lines cutting through forests. These are actually kind of more resilient corridors secured by utility equipment, and so it fits. And it's another model for pooling. And I think that we've had some state leaders go out and see that project, and I think that's one of the drivers for this kind of task force kind of utility partnership strategy was seeing that model and saying that makes sense. We should do more of that. To do, especially if you just try and pick a given location off the map, you need the right partners and context. But I think all those are really kind of in addition to Salt River Product, who I think is kind of the gold standard for this right now. I think we can all learn from each other, and I think it's a new discipline we can hopefully build together.
Thanks, Kevin. Did that answer your question, Lincoln? Do you have any follow-up?
It did. Now this is a lot of. I'm geeking out on this. There's a lot of follow-up reading I'm planning to do. So I really appreciate it.
Great. Other questions from our audience? Are silent. I'm going to ask one, Kevin. Just sort of an open-ended one, but I'm encouraged by what you shared. You start off a very pessimistic look, and I think you're offering a nice glimmer of hope of how we might tackle this big problem of wildfires in California. But I'm wondering, sort of piggybacks on Lincoln's question, of how challenging has it been to engage with communities. One thing that was clear is that you talked about Lake County, you talked about some counties which I would have thought that might be harder to connect with. So I think you've had some major successes, and for lack of better words, there's some more under-resourced communities, right? We think of it here in Silicon Valley. We've got Napa County and Marin and Santa Clara County. We're, I would say, more resourced counties that can write grant applications and probably have a staff to partner with. Have you met challenges and overcome some challenges in terms of getting these collaborations built, and what other challenges do you foresee needing to overcome in the months ahead so that this really could be more of a universal solution as opposed to isolated to certain pockets of communities that are willing to partner with PG&E?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I would say that so far we've been going where we feel like the deck is stacked to create a successful project. So yeah, it has not been a universal solution yet. In Lake County, we found a great partner, a nonprofit that is quite high capacity in that region, and they've been kind of the anchor to help enable this work. But yeah, not every county is going to have that horsepower. So this is actually an interesting advantage of doing this from a utility and police chiefs from around our service area, who are now the liaisons to those first responders in the utility. But they oftentimes have a lot of insight into which groups and which projects are the most promising. And so we can kind of leverage those boots on the ground, and they've been great about kind of identifying, don't go over here, go over here. This is a great partner. And in some cases, I think you're right that there will be, areas where there's just not to partner in the first place. And I think this is actually where it's helped to have a larger partner like an American Foundation, basically a national organization that kind of parachute gaps and hopefully build capacity and/or step in for capacity where when it's not there. So I think being a little bit bespoke based on the location, but that's kind of how we're thinking about it now.
Yeah, that's encouraging too. Yeah, I
But
think.
I would,
Go ahead.
yeah, and I didn't answer your full question, so let me answer the rest of it too. Generally, the community response has been really good, so I don't want to leave that part out. So we've had some of this work go in front of board of supervisors, and they're like, "This is great." Is universal. And people have thrown us press releases like that's not normal for utility, or press events, and have put out news articles and talking about the partnership. I really think it's actually a way to kind of change the conversation in a very positive way too, because it's a very visible, very tangible way that I think we think about utilities. It's when there's an outage or when they get a bill, and those aren't great touch points. And I think this is a totally different way of showing for our customers. So I think it's going to be a big positive on the public side so far, but we'll continue to see. So far, it's been nothing but positive.
That's great. Well, I'm really encouraged to hear that. James, I saw you brought yourself up, so I assume you have a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I do. So speaking of under-resourced counties or areas, I happen to live in one. I'm at the southern end of Kern County in an area that happens to be served by SoCal Edison. And our community is, I guess I have two questions for you. So we live absolutely in that wildland urban interface, and there are a large number of people in our community and the communities around us, all of which are unincorporated, that are concerned about this kind of fire risk. And so I was really encouraged by your presentation, just seeing what kinds of things might be available and what successes you're seeing all across the state, which is just so encouraging. So my two questions for you are, it's great to see what PG&E is doing. Do you happen to know if SoCal Edison is doing anything comparable? And my second question is, how would you suggest that communities that are interested in these kinds of public-private partnerships get started?
Great questions.
Yeah, those are good questions. Yeah, and I'm not sure I'm going to have great answers for you. So my interaction with Southern California Edison has been light so far. They do have a forester near Shaver Lake who, and I think this has been going for years, who's been managing that landscape seemingly very well. And as I understand it, when the Creek Fire kind of roared through towards that area, it was a lot of that work that SCE did and also the nearby fire safe councils that really kind of helped knock that down and save a bunch of structures and community. So I actually take that as another success story that maybe I should have even mentioned earlier. But it's kind of I think more of a localized use case rather than one general to the service area. I haven't talked to, I've not engaged or found a counterpart there yet, but that doesn't mean they're not interested in it. I feel like I keep hearing that maybe there is. But I have less to say on that. And in terms of, but I hope, this is going to be another way that utilities show up. And the part of the goal here is to make it clear that this is another, helpful tool in the toolbox. But we're early. And right now we just got to put points on the board. And communities get started. It's a really good question. I think, as Derek kind of alluded to, there dramatically different, awareness and buy-in for this type of work. Often fire safe councils or resource conservation districts, if not, local fire districts, are great for doing this. There are pro-based communities that kind of provide a playbook for, groups of homes to collectively reduce risk. I actually think that we're on the precipice of a lot more intelligence and guidance coming over the next few years in a way that hasn't happened to date, because frankly, the fire science and the guidance hasn't been that strong. My hope is there's going to be more prescriptive guidance, and that if you have these kind of organizations in place and you can start to go forth and get more of this work done and apply for grants. So I don't have a great answer for you, Firewise communities and/or support your local fire council and I think the more horsepower those groups have, the more likely you're going to be in a better spot later.
Thank you very much.
Great. Other questions from the audience? Anyone else? Hi, please go ahead. Is it Maran? I'm not going to mispronounce your name. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much for your presentation. I had a question specifically kind of for PSPS and kind of how you broadly think about kind of mitigating the impact to customers from any measures to reduce the risk of or the programs of wildfire mitigation and kind of like all the efforts to reduce the risk of wildfires. And I know there's a lot of messaging and early notifications and community centers and having that communication with impacted customers. But if you could just talk broadly about how you view those.
Yeah, I'll want to say up front, not my department, and it's not something that I've been as immersed in as the other things that I talked about. My understanding of PSPS is partly we've been trying to get more surgical in where it needs to happen. And so I think more data, in more localized contexts, and then being able to have smaller areas that we can also turn off just with our own electric equipment. I think that's a key. And then also just figuring out how to restore power as quickly as possible and communicate in the meantime, in addition to having those and also provide, for example, for customers, potentially backup power. So those are all kind of mitigations that we've been taking now. I think it is, it is very effective, and it correlates with big fires, correlates with ignition from power lines, because stuff gets thrown into power lines, and then that very same wind then spreads the fire. And so they're quite coupled. And so, I think it is a fact of life for the near future. We want to make them as painless as possible, but yeah, the downside of getting it wrong is so big. It really is a effective and cost-effective solution we need to stick with. So that's my understanding of what we're doing now. Does that address your question?
Yeah, thank you. No, I totally agree. It's kind of like getting that range where you really don't want to spread outages or keep customers in the dark, but at the same time the risk is just so massive. And so yeah, it's a tough thing to balance, but yeah, thank you for your insights.
Thanks for the question. Any other questions? We're almost at roundup time, but any other questions? Okay, I have one more, Kevin. I think you sort of alluded to the fact that you helped a couple communities write grants with CAL FIRE. I'm wondering if PG&E has opened any direct talks with CAL FIRE or tried to, you know, form maybe a more formal relationship of how to bridge the gap between CAL FIRE community grants and PG&E and cost sharing. Because it sounds like, there's sort of a three-way partnership that could happen that could really make a lot of benefits. And it seems like you're already doing, but I'm wondering if there have been actual conversations with CAL FIRE about what PG&E is trying to accomplish as opposed to what CAL FIRE is trying to do with their grant program. If that made any sense.
Yeah, so I understand that we actually haven't written any grants yet. Yeah, it does. It's a good question. But we haven't actually written them so far has been, to match with, for other groups applications that we think are really high value. And so I think that's been the role to play. I don't know that writing them ourselves is the right, place for us to work. But in terms of working with CAL FIRE, and partly this is because, we're trying to do this. We've been in the learning phase and trying to basically get projects. There are a lot of people, most people that we work with at the company and our regulators, think about energy. And this is not, this is so far in the left field and to where they're from. We've had some budgets a bit scaled yet. Part of it is, trying to have the right conversations, but that are tailored so that we are not getting people's, hopes up or setting expectations that we're not positioned to meet yet. I think once we do have that kind of buy-in, and or have that internal and external alignment to kind of scale what this is beyond this kind of pilot level that it is now, I think it's pretty natural. So potential collaborators, the state task force is also set up these 4 regional planning entities to kind of look at which areas within the 4 regions as they define in the state need the most work. I could also see integrating with those as well. But yeah, right now I just want to demonstrate this is a good idea, and then we can start to optimize and fine tune the scaling path as a second step. So
Well, you got a
hopefully to come,
cheerleader
but
here,
nothing too
and I
big yet.
think you have shown that it works. At least so you keep the ball moving forward, and hopefully we'll hear in a couple of years how this has really expanded. Well, I want to thank Kevin for his time today and just his
Great.
insights, and it's his encouragement that PG&E is doing some really great work. At least I think. I'm sort of biased in this front, so I can connect you with Kevin if you have some follow-up questions later. I hope you'll join us for the next 4 weeks. We have 4 more weeks of great talks, including a talk next week about wildland firefighter health and really thinking about the big picture of the health of those trying to suppress fires and protect our communities. So thanks again, Kevin. Thanks again for people attending, and we'll see you again hopefully next week. Take care. Bye-bye.